will invite Catalina Kovacevic to come on stage, and she's from the OECD, and she will talk us through the PISA 2025 language assessment, a foreign language assessment program. It's a very interesting program. So, stage manager, if you can invite Catalina to come on, and then I will leave this one. Great. Catalina, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, we can hear you. Okay, that's wonderful.
I'm just missing the presentation.
Let me see if I can get that for you. There we go. Can you see it okay?
Yes, perfect. Let
Great.
me just see if the clicking works. Sorry, I'm having problems clicking on the presentation. What am I supposed to click so it moves?
I think I've got control. So do you just want to let me know when you want to move to the next one, and I'll...
Okay, perfect. Yes, so I'm ready to start. Should I start? So should I begin? Yes?
Yes, please do. Thanks.
Okay. So thank you very much for having me here today. My name, as was already described, is Catalina Kovacevic, and I'm going to be presenting the PISA 2025 foreign language assessment. So I'm first going to give a very brief description of PISA, and then I'm going to move on specifically to the foreign language assessment option. Next slide, please. So I work for the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We're an international organization that works to build better policies for better lives. Next slide, please. And within the OECD, I work specifically for the Directorate of Education and Skills, and within that for PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. That is the world's largest survey of educational outcomes. We currently have over 80 countries participating. And what we assess are educational systems. So we do not focus on individual students, we do not focus on individual schools, we focus on the whole educational system. We have been implementing this assessment every 3 years since the year 2000. And what we do is that we choose representative samples of students of the participating countries. So we have more than 500,000 15-year-old students participating per cycle that are representative samples of their countries. We focus on real-life skills. This means that we don't focus on the curriculum, but rather we want to know if students can apply what they have learned at school to real-life situations. And we assess lots of different things. We call them domains. You could also call them subjects, I guess. In every cycle, we always assess maths, reading, and science. We also assess one innovative domain that typically assesses something quite different to the traditional school subjects, such as, for example, creative thinking. And we also have options that countries may choose to take or not. And the foreign language assessment will be an option. Next slide, please. So, though it's very small there, this slide is about the actual test. So this is a computer-based test. It lasts 2 hours per student. And because we don't deliver results at the student level, different students actually answer different items. So this allows us better coverage of the contents of the test. In PISA 2018, that's the last cycle that we implemented, we designed a multi-stage adaptive approach for the reading test. And we are doing that now for maths, and we will do it in the next cycle also for science. And we have a mixture of both open-ended and closed-ended questions in all our tests. Next slide, please. So why do countries participate in PISA? What do they get out of it? And they actually get several things. And the first thing they get is benchmarking. So this is the opportunity to see how the students of their country know, how much do they know in comparison with the students from other countries. So here we have the order of the performance in reading in PISA 2018. You may have heard this also referred to as a PISA ranking, but we rather call it benchmarking. So there you can see what countries are the highest performers, which ones are mid performers, and which countries are the low performers. Next slide, please. But we don't only just give the ranking, we give also something that's a lot better for pedagogical purposes. That is an actual description of what students can do. So we have 6 proficiency levels, and what we do is that we provide countries with a proportion of students that are in each of these proficiency levels. So you can see there that's the distribution that we're showing. We have from level 1 to 6, and in the last few years we have been further dividing level 1 so we could offer a better description of what was going on at the bottom levels. And this is particularly relevant for some of the middle-income countries that have been joining. Next slide, please. We also provide countries with trends. So this means that because we apply PISA every 3 years, and most countries participate in every cycle, this is an opportunity to see how knowledge has evolved in students. So you can actually see if the policies that countries have been implemented seem to be working or not. Are things getting better? Are they staying the same? Are they getting worse? And in the slide, you can see the countries that have made significant improvement in one of the 3 domains in PISA 2018. Next slide, please. And lastly, but not the least important, countries also get policy lessons. So what we do is that we collect a lot of contextual information from countries, a lot of information about how the education systems work. So the idea is to be able to learn from other countries, to see what seems to be working, to see what other countries are doing differently, and that perhaps you can apply in your own country. So an example of this that unfortunately for some reason I cannot see the names of the countries. I don't think you can either. But what this shows is both expenditure in education, so accumulated expenditure, and results in PISA reading. And what you can see here is that there is a relationship between how much investment is made and the results in reading. And I don't think this is particularly surprising for anyone. But what the slide also shows, particularly when you can actually see the country names, is that it's not only about money. So yes, money makes a difference, but only up to a certain point. And then it's quite clear from the data that it's not a matter of just investing more money in the system. It's really more a matter of what are you doing with the resources. And even before that, I can't provide the specific examples because we don't have the country names, but if you look at those little dots, you will see that some of them are making similar levels of investment, and yet the results I obtain are really, really different. So that's an opportunity for countries to learn from one another and to see, okay, that other country is doing a lot better than me, and they're actually not investing more money than me. So what is it that they're doing differently? Next slide, please. So that was the very brief overview I'm going to give about PISA, and now I want to move on specifically to the foreign language assessment. So we have been asked by countries to incorporate an assessment of foreign language skills for quite a while, and this is because, as you must all be aware, foreign language skills are really, really important in curricula around the world right now, and countries have invested a lot of resources. And they want to know, are things working? How am I doing? How am I doing compared to other countries? Next slide, please. And it's also relevant to know that right now, there is no other internationally comparative data collection at the school system level of foreign language skills. So there have been some in the past that are listed there. Unfortunately, none of them could repeat a second or a third cycle. And that is something that we can offer in PISA. Because PISA is implemented every 3 years under a cyclic nature, we can actually offer to do this several times, and it will not be just a one-off thing. Next slide, please. So what will the countries get out of this option? What will the assessment deliver to them? And it's basically the same that they get out of PISA in general, but applied specifically to foreign languages. So on one hand, they will get international comparisons. So this means that we will provide them with benchmarking, like I showed you in the first slide, with the ranking, just a comparison, an overall idea of how am I doing compared with other countries. But we will also provide them with proficiency levels, with detailed descriptions of what their students can actually do. And we made a decision that for PISA is quite groundbreaking, and that we will not use our own PISA proficiency levels, but we decided to use the CFR levels instead. And this decision was because the CFR is widely used throughout the world for education purposes, for curriculums, for national assessments. So they are levels that people are already familiarized with. So if you say, for example, that half of your students do not reach a level 3 in PISA, it's quite difficult for teachers, for policymakers to understand what that may mean. But if you say half of your students are not at level A1, okay, that's something that people actually know a little bit more about. And we will also provide trend data because countries will have the opportunity to participate more than once. We will also provide countries with national diagnostics, so a description of the strengths and weaknesses in the mastery of foreign languages of their students. And we will also provide a description of how this varies throughout the system. So, for example, what happens when you compare urban schools with rural schools? Is a performance difference? And we will also double click on the relationships between the language skills of the students, the learning context, and the exposure that they have to foreign languages outside of the school system. Because we know that in the case of foreign languages, even more than in the case of maths or science, it's not only about what is the school system doing, it's also about what is happening in the wider context. And finally, we will provide countries with policy and practice lessons. So the idea of this assessment is to be able to identify the best practices worldwide in terms of teaching practices and the use of resources on language learning. So this will help guide policy decisions, and it will help inform and improve language teaching and learning. Next slide, please. So this is a collaborative effort, as is always the case in PISA. In this particular case, we have been working very closely with the governments of the participating PISA countries, with researchers, with national and international experts, with partners, and us, the OECD Secretariat. The European Commission has been immensely helpful. They have supported us with their expertise. They have also co-funded several of the activities. And we are developing the tests under a partnership with Cambridge Assessment English. Next slide, please. So this is the roadmap of the assessment, and my intention here is not to go over each activity in detail. It's just to give you an idea of how long it takes us to implement this assessment. So we will actually conduct the main data collection in 2025, and we will have the results in December 2026. But for that, we actually started working in 2019, so a lot of time in advance. And right now, nearly 5 years before the results, we already have the framework for the questionnaires, the framework for the tests. They're available on our webpage if you would like to see them. We already have the drafts of the questionnaires. We have a pretty advanced test design, and we will be inviting countries to formalize if they will participate or not next year. So all this design phase has to happen before we actually know how many countries will participate in the first cycle. Next slide, please. So I want to give you a brief overview of some characteristics of this assessment. But before that, I wanted to give you some context. PISA is governed by a governing board, and we were given quite strict guidelines about what they expected of this assessment, and it was keep it simple, keep it cheap, and start off small. And the reasons for this are several. One is that we are an assessment that specializes in reading and writing. We have never really explored listening and speaking before, and we will explore that now. But we have to be very cautious because we have to be able to ensure that that comparability of results will be maintained. And PISA is implemented nationally by each government. And we have a lot of guidelines to assure the comparability. And we have to be able to build those guidelines for an assessment that is actually quite different. The other consideration is that this is an option and countries will opt to take it or not. And those countries who do opt to take it will be making huge investments. They will have to pay to participate. They will have to implement this in their country. They will have to invest a lot of resources. So if we come up with a design that's super complex or that has a lot of demands on schools, for example, or that's really expensive, we may be leaving countries out that could not commit because it was too complicated or it was too expensive. So we were trying to take all this into account when we designed the test, while at the same time we were trying to have as much breadth as possible. So the regularity is that it will be offered not every PISA cycle, but every second PISA cycle. And this will enable the analysis of trends. The cognitive framework I mentioned already will be based on the CFR. In the case of the proficiency levels, For the first cycle, we will aim at covering from pre-A1 to C1. And in terms of languages, we had to make a choice. And the choice that we made was that we will start only with one language in the first cycle, and that language will be English. But we do have the clear intention to expand to more languages in future cycles. Next slide, please. In terms of the skills, we also had to make some choices. We would have loved to start off with everything, but we were told explicitly not to. So we will start off with reading, and this is something that we're quite confident that we know how to do. And we will also explore speaking and listening. And this is quite groundbreaking for us. As you can see, what we left out was writing, but we would be able perhaps to include it in the next cycles. And the decision regarding what skills to include was not made based on what was easier to assess. It was based on what skills were more relevant for the countries. We will be able to provide a correlation between reading in the student's language of instruction and reading in the foreign language. And in terms of scaling and reporting, we will provide different results, separated results for each skill. And we will have a score, an overall score, and we will also provide CFR proficiency levels. And I also wanted to mention the questionnaires. So for us in PISA, the questionnaires are as important as the tests, because this is how we get the contextual information that allows us actually to look at the policies that are being implemented in countries and to know more about the students that are participating in the assessment. So we will be adding modules to the school, the teacher, the parent, and the student questionnaire. We also created a new system-level questionnaire that focuses on the policy level in each country for foreign language teachers. And this will enable us to have a lot of information on many different levels. So for example, about students, we will know how much hours of homework do they have on foreign language? Do they have extra foreign language lessons? What do they actually use foreign languages for outside of the classroom? Do their parents speak any foreign languages? We will know a lot about classroom practices, and we will know a lot about the national policies. So for example, what are the requirements to become a foreign language teacher in that specific country? And we will also gather information on the overall context. So for example, if the student goes to the movies, what languages are the movies in? If a kid watches TV, open TV, is it in a local language? Is it in a foreign language? That kind of information. Next slide, please. And to finalize, I just wanted to explicitly mention some of the threads that are guiding the discussions at this seminar. So multilingualism is an issue for us. We want to promote multilingualism, and yet we had to make a choice in terms of how many languages we could assess in the first cycle. So there is a balance between the things you would like to do and the things that you can actually do, particularly when we were told to start small and that we can grow later. COVID is an issue for us. I think has been for everyone. Originally, PISA 2025 was actually going to be PISA 2024. And for the first time since PISA has started, we have had a cycle that is not 3 years long, but 4 years long because of COVID. So we had to delay everything. PISA 2021 became PISA 2024. So we had to move PISA 2024 into 2025. But the main theme for us is the future, because PISA is always all about the future. We are always thinking ahead. We need to plan for the long term, and we need to be planning for trends, because if you want to be able to offer trends, it means you can't get very creative with the instruments. You can make some adaptations to the frameworks, you can make some adaptations to the instruments, but you cannot make huge changes. So that means that any decision that we're making today for the 2025 cycle will actually impact the 2033 cycle. And this applies both to the development of the frameworks and to the instruments. We need to have a framework and instruments that can stand the pass of time. We need a framework that when you read it in 2033, it still makes sense. It's still the kind of variable that you would imagine have an impact on the assessment of foreign languages. So for example, in the framework for the questionnaires, we have been really careful not to specify too much what technologies or examples of technologies that teachers may use in the classroom, because we know that that kind of thing becomes outdated quite quickly. And we have also been thinking a lot about the instrument because we know that we won't be able to change it too much for the next cycle, or we will lose the comparability. Thank you very much.
Perfect timing. Thank you, Catalina. Really, thank you very much. That's really interesting, a really interesting initiative. Please do talk to Catalina. In the break, there was a question from Jackie Robbins. Is this the first time that PISA has looked at foreign language learning? I think it is, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And we're incredibly excited about it because we had been planning this for quite a while, but we had never managed to agree on how this should be approached before.
Perfect. Great. Thanks very much. Do talk to Catalina. We've now just got 3 minutes until our next session, which is about the ALTE principles of good practice. So see you in a few minutes, or do join room 1 for workshops on personalized assessment and using data. Catalina, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.